What does a pilgrimage have to do with hyperinflation? Imagine a single traveler so wealthy that his vacation crashed the economy of the most powerful kingdom in the region for over a decade. This isn't a modern fiscal fable. This is the true story of Mansa Musa, the 14th century emperor of Mali, and his legendary Hajj to Cairo in 1324. Forget central banks and quantitative easing. The world's first recorded case of destination inflation was caused not by policy, but by a king on a holy journey, spending so much gold that he turned prosperity into poverty for an entire nation. Welcome to the economic shockwave that history never forgot. To comprehend the unprecedented scale of the economic disruption Mansa Musa was poised to unleash, we must first quantify the staggering source of his wealth. In the early 14th century, the Mali Empire was not merely a regional power, but the undisputed primary supplier of gold to the entire Mediterranean and Middle Eastern economic sphere. Mansa Musa inherited an empire built directly atop the legendary Bambuk and Bouré goldfields, controlling what modern economists and historians estimate was over half of the Old World's known circulating gold supply. His wealth, therefore, transcended personal opulence. It constituted a foundational, geopolitical asset that underpinned international finance. This West African gold minted the dinars of Cairo, financed the merchant states of Venice and Genoa, and lubricated the vast trans-Saharan trade networks in salt, cloth, and slaves. Mansa Musa was not just a wealthy monarch. He was, in practical terms, a one-man central bank holding a dominant share of the global hard currency reserve. This extraordinary concentration of a single, highly liquid commodity created a profound systemic vulnerability. The global economy of the medieval era, though fragmented, was interconnected through this golden thread, and Mali held the spool. When Mansa Musa mobilized this wealth, he wasn't moving treasure. He was preparing to inject a hyper-concentrated monetary mass into a foreign financial system wholly unprepared for the influx. The potential for inflationary shock was immense, inherent in the very geography of his empire's resources. The stage for economic catastrophe was set not in the markets of Cairo, but in the Malian heartland where gold was so abundant it was considered almost a natural resource to be harvested, awaiting the single decision that would transform it from a stabilizer into a weapon of financial chaos. Mansa Musa's Hajj in 1324 CE was a strategic operation disguised as a religious procession, a calculated display of power designed to broadcast Mali's sovereignty and piety to the Islamic world. Contemporary chroniclers like the Arab scholar Al-Amari recorded a caravan of mythic proportions, a moving city of 60,000 souls snaking across the Sahara Desert. This included a full military escort, royal family members, government officials, and 12,000 personal slaves adorned in fine Persian silks. The economic payload was carried by a dedicated vanguard. 500 slaves marched at the front, each bearing a staff of solid gold weighing approximately 4 pounds. Imagine 2,000 pounds of pure gold, just the advance party. The main caravan included hundreds of camels, each laden with dozens of leather sacks containing gold dust. Conservative modern estimates placed the total gold transported at over 20,000 pounds, but its value was incalculable in contemporary terms. It represented multiple years of total global gold production. This was not hidden wealth. It was a performative, flowing treasury. Every stop, every greeting, was an opportunity for lavish gift-giving and alms, strategically deploying gold to build alliances and demonstrate divine favor. The pilgrimage route itself became a vector for monetary transmission. The intent was spiritual prestige and diplomatic recognition, but the mechanism was raw, uncontrolled fiscal stimulus. Mansa Musa carried with him the equivalent of a modern quantitative easing program on camelback, destined for the sophisticated but finite markets of Egypt. He was not a malicious actor, but a force of economic nature, unaware that his piety and power were primed to destabilize the very concept of value in the regions he sought to impress. The caravan's arrival in Cairo in the spring of 1324 was an event of seismic social and economic consequence. Mansa Musa and his entourage entered the Mamluk Sultanate's capital, then one of the world's wealthiest and most sophisticated trading hubs. His meeting with Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad was a diplomatic spectacle where Mansa Musa, adhering to his principles, initially refused to prostrate himself, only agreeing after a theological compromise. This cultural negotiation was a footnote to the financial negotiation already underway in Cairo's souks. Mansa Musa and his vast court needed supplies, lodging, and gifts. They paid exclusively in gold. They purchased textiles, spices, slaves, provisions, and luxury goods, tipping servants and merchants with handfuls of gold dust. The initial effect was a spectacular boom. Cairo's merchants experienced a windfall of historic proportions. Gold, the bedrock of the Mamluk currency, suddenly flooded the market. But the Mamluk economy, though robust, operated on a relatively fixed money supply of precious metals. The sudden, massive injection of gold, a supply shock of unimaginable scale, began a rapid devaluation of the metal itself. Within weeks, the gold dinar's purchasing power plummeted. The very act of spending, meant to display grandeur, had triggered a classic case of hyperinflation. The price of basic goods, grain, cloth, livestock, spiraled upward as the gold used to buy them became increasingly common and thus less valuable. Cairo was caught in a paradox, swimming in gold, yet sinking into a cost of living crisis. The emperor's shopping spree had, within a single season, broken the foundational link between the Mamluk currency and its value. To understand the ruin Mansa Musa wrought, we must analyze the precise mechanics of this medieval inflation. The Mamluk economy, like most pre-modern systems, was not a fiat system but a commodity money system. The value of the primary currency, the gold dinar, was intrinsically tied to the scarcity and agreed-upon value of the gold it contained. The money supply was effectively constrained by the rate of mining, conquest, and trade. Mansa Musa's arrival represented a massive, exogenous supply shock to the gold commodity market. Economic models describe this as a drastic rightward shift in the supply curve. The quantity of gold in Cairo increased dramatically almost overnight, while demand for it, for savings jewelry and existing contracts, remained relatively stable in the short term. The result was a collapse in gold's price, or, in the context of a gold-based currency, a collapse in the value of money. This devaluation manifested as rampant price inflation across the entire economy. A loaf of bread that cost 1 dinar might now cost 5, not because bread was scarcer, but because the dinar was fundamentally less scarce. This eroded real wages, devastated people on fixed incomes, and created arbitrary redistributions of wealth. Merchants who sold goods early reaped fortunes in now devalued gold, while those who held gold as savings saw their wealth evaporate. The velocity of money also likely increased as people rushed to spend the unstable currency, exacerbating the inflationary spiral. Mansa Musa had inadvertently executed a perfect, real-world experiment in monetary theory, demonstrating that even gold, the ultimate symbol of permanent value, could be inflated into worthlessness if its supply was suddenly and massively increased. The inflationary spike was catastrophic, but the long-term economic depression that followed was the true measure of the damage. After depleting his travel funds, Mansa Musa continued his pilgrimage to Mecca, leaving Cairo's economy in tatters. With the local gold supply now oversaturated, the dinar remained severely depreciated. The cost of goods and services stayed stubbornly high, crippling trade and commerce. Economic activity didn't just adjust, it contracted. Confidence in the primary medium of exchange had been shattered. Historical records suggest a period of economic stagnation lasting at least 12 years. To stabilize the crisis, Mansa Musa, on his return journey around 1325, took a drastic corrective measure. He borrowed back as much of his gold as possible from Cairo's money lenders at high interest. This act, essentially a contractionary monetary policy, sought to drain the excess liquidity from the market. While this helped slowly restore the dinar's value by re-establishing gold scarcity, it came at a secondary cost. The repayment of these loans with interest further transferred wealth from the Egyptian economy back to Mali. The episode left a dual legacy. In Cairo, a cautionary tale of the dangers of excessive wealth concentration and monetary instability. In Mali, a solidified reputation for unimaginable riches that would both inspire and destabilize future relations with the wider world. The Mansa Musa inflation became a historical benchmark for how a single actor's actions could distort an economy for a generation. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was never a purely economic event. It was a fusion of religious duty, soft power, and unintentional financial warfare. His primary goals were spiritual merit and elevating Mali's status within the Dar al-Islam. By funding the construction of mosques, most famously the Jingareber Mosque in Timbuktu, and endowing libraries and universities, he sought to position Mali as a center of Islamic learning and piety, not just wealth. The economic carnage in Cairo was a catastrophic side effect of this ambition. Geopolitically, the journey put Mali irrevocably on the world map, literally. Catalan cartographer Abraham Cresques included Mali and an image of Mansa Musa holding a gold nugget on the 1375 Catalan Atlas, cementing the empire's legendary status in the European imagination. This fame, however, had a dark side. It broadcast the location of immense, accessible wealth, ultimately drawing the attention of future European powers and contributing to the later exploitation of the African continent. The pilgrimage thus represents a pivotal paradox. It was the apex of Mali's independent power and cultural achievement, yet the very display of that power contained the seeds of future vulnerability. Mansa Musa succeeded in showcasing his empire's glory but did so through a medium, gold, that destabilized neighbors and attracted distant, envious gazes. His story is the ultimate case study in the law of unintended consequences, where the pursuit of religious and political capital resulted in severe financial and historical fallout, weaving together themes of faith, economics, and power in a single, transformative journey. The inflationary shockwave from Cairo did not remain contained within Egypt's borders. As a major hub in the Mediterranean and Red Sea trade networks, Cairo's economic distress sent disruptive ripples outward. The devaluation of gold in Egypt distorted regional exchange rates. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and Alexandria who traded with Cairo found the value of their gold-based payments and contracts suddenly in flux, introducing severe risk and uncertainty into long-distance commerce. Some historians posit that the sudden influx of West African gold into the broader Mediterranean system may have contributed to a longer-term, gradual devaluation of gold relative to silver in Europe, influencing later monetary developments. Furthermore, the tale of Mali's wealth, carried back by traders and diplomats, fundamentally altered the European geographical and economic imagination. Prior to Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, European knowledge of sub-Saharan Africa was vague and myth-laden. The confirmed reports of a gold-rich empire south of the Sahara provided a powerful economic motive for exploration, eventually influencing Portuguese seafaring expeditions down the West African coast in the following century. Thus, the immediate economic crisis in Cairo catalyzed longer-term geopolitical and exploratory shifts. Mansa Musa's spending spree, therefore, was not just a local economic event, but a global historical pivot point, connecting the Saharan caravan routes to the budding mercantile ambitions of Renaissance Europe and demonstrating how a monetary disturbance in one center could recalibrate the economic perceptions and ambitions of an entire hemisphere. The Mansa Musa inflation provides a stark, primitive contrast to modern monetary policy, highlighting the perils of an uncontrolled money supply. Today, central banks like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank carefully manage currency supply and interest rates to target low, stable inflation. They use tools like open market operations and reserve requirements to add or drain liquidity from the economy in measured doses. Mansa Musa acted as an utterly unconstrained, one-man central bank, executing the largest single quantitative easing program in history until the modern era, but without any of the controls, models, or exit strategies. He injected a colossal volume of money, gold, directly into the consumer market, bypassing the banking system, with no mechanism to stabilize prices or manage expectations. Modern hyperinflations, like in Zimbabwe or the Weimar Republic, stem from a loss of confidence and excessive printing of fiat currency. Mansa Musa's case was different. It was a hyperinflation caused by a supply shock to the commodity backing the currency itself. This makes it a unique historical lesson. It demonstrates that even with a hard, commodity-backed currency, stability is not guaranteed if the supply of that commodity can be unpredictably and massively altered by external actors. The episode underscores the fundamental importance of monetary sovereignty and the delicate balance required to maintain a stable medium of exchange, a challenge that continues to define economic policy to this day. Behind the economic theory and the glittering tale of gold lies a profound human cost often glossed over in history. The artisans, laborers, fixed-income scholars, and small-scale merchants of Cairo and its environs bore the brunt of the inflation Mansa Musa triggered. As the price of staples like wheat, barley, and lentils skyrocketed, real wages collapsed. A family's life savings, held in a few gold dinars, could lose most of its purchasing power in a matter of months. This led to increased poverty, hunger, and social unrest. The arbitrary redistribution of wealth created stark winners and losers. Merchants who sold goods to the caravan at the peak of prices amassed devalued gold, while lenders who had extended credit before the inflation saw the real value of their repayments evaporate. Social contracts based on stable prices were broken. The psychological impact of such a rapid devaluation of the foundational store of value, gold itself, would have been deeply traumatic, breeding uncertainty and eroding trust in institutions and the future. This human dimension transforms the story from a curious economic anomaly into a stark lesson in the real-world consequences of monetary instability. It reminds us that behind terms like inflationary shock and devaluation are disrupted lives, broken livelihoods, and a loss of societal equilibrium that can take years, even a generation, to heal. Mansa Musa's spiritual journey, for all its grandeur, cast a long shadow of material suffering over thousands of innocent Egyptians. On his return from Mecca around 1325, Mansa Musa was confronted with the economic devastation he had caused. His response was an unprecedented and shrewd act of financial rectification. He borrowed back a significant portion of his spent gold from Cairo's money lenders at high rates of interest. This maneuver is one of history's first recorded attempts at a deliberate, contractionary monetary policy. By taking gold out of circulation in Egypt, concentrating it back into his treasury to repay the debt to Mali, he sought to reverse the supply shock, restore scarcity, and stabilize the value of the dinar. In modern terms, it was akin to a central bank selling bonds to drain liquidity from the market. While this helped correct the price distortion over time, it was a painfully slow cure. Moreover, it had controversial effects. The high interest on these loans meant that even more wealth ultimately flowed from Egypt to Mali, effectively making Cairo pay twice, first through inflation, then through debt servicing. Some scholars view this not as a benevolent correction, but as a further exploitation, turning a crisis of accident into an opportunity for usurious profit. Whether seen as a responsible cleanup or a predatory refinancing, the borrowback highlights Mansa Musa's growing awareness of economic cause and effect. It also underscores the brutal simplicity of medieval economics. Recovery was achieved not by stimulus or complex instruments, but by physically reversing the flow of metal, a stark lesson in the tangible realities of commodity-based finance. While Egypt reeled, Mali invested. A significant portion of the wealth displayed and spent on the Hajj was strategically redirected upon Mansa Musa's return to transform his empire's intellectual capital. His most enduring legacy is the foundation of Timbuktu as a preeminent center of Islamic scholarship and trade. He brought back with him architects, poets, and scholars from the Middle East, most notably the Andalusian poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who is credited with designing the iconic Jingareber Mosque. Mansa Musa funded libraries and attracted jurists, mathematicians, and astronomers, making the Sankore University complex a beacon of learning that drew students from across Africa and the Arab world. This represents a critical pivot, the conversion of transient, destabilizing monetary wealth, gold, into lasting cultural and human capital, knowledge, architecture, institutions. The gold that inflated Cairo's markets was used to build an intellectual empire in the Sahara. This strategic investment ensured that Mali's legacy would outlive its gold mines. Timbuktu became synonymous not just with remote riches, but with a flourishing of art, science, and legal scholarship. Thus, the same journey that caused economic ruin abroad catalyzed a cultural golden age at home, illustrating a profound economic principle. The true value of wealth lies not in its hoarding or reckless dispersal, but in its strategic investment in assets that generate lasting returns for society. Our understanding of this economic event hinges on a handful of key historical sources, primarily Arab chroniclers like Al-Amari, Ibn Khaldun, and Ibn Battuta, who wrote decades after the events. Al-Amari, writing in the 1340s, provides the most detailed account of the caravan's splendor and the market disruption in Cairo, which he learned from eyewitnesses and officials. However, these sources are not dispassionate economic reports. They are often meant to convey moral lessons about the dangers of excessive wealth or to marvel at God's wonders. The precise scale of the inflation, the exact price increases and duration, is not quantified with modern rigor. Some modern economists debate the severity and length of the depression, suggesting the resilient Mamluk economy may have recovered more quickly than traditional narratives claim. The debate centers on interpreting anecdotal evidence within the context of a pre-modern economy with less integrated markets. Nonetheless, the core narrative is consistent across multiple independent sources. Mansa Musa's arrival caused a massive, temporary devaluation of gold and significant price inflation in Egypt. While we may lack precise GDP figures, the historical consensus affirms this as a real and profound economic shock. This highlights the challenge of economic history. We piece together macroeconomic events from qualitative shards of evidence, reminding us that the story of Mansa Musa's inflation sits at the intersection of verifiable fact and enduring legend. The tale of Mansa Musa has been mythologized, often focusing on the spectacle of gold and his title as history's richest person. This obscures the profound economic reality of the event. The myth is one of limitless wealth and generosity. The reality is a textbook case of monetary instability with devastating consequences. The myth portrays a benevolent king showering gifts. The reality shows how uncoordinated fiscal injection can wreck an economy. Separating the two is crucial for the lesson to be learned. Mansa Musa was not an economic terrorist. He was a ruler operating within the logic of his time, using wealth to achieve spiritual and political ends. The economic laws he inadvertently demonstrated, however, are timeless. The quantity theory of money, the relationship between supply and value, and the societal trauma of inflation. By demystifying the story, we move from a fable about a rich king to a cornerstone case study in economic history. It warns that wealth is not an abstract number, but a tangible force that must be managed with an understanding of its systemic impact. The Mansa Musa inflation endures not because of the glitter, but because it is a pure, almost laboratory-like example of what happens when a single agent overwhelms a market's capacity to absorb liquidity. A warning is relevant to modern cryptocurrency whales and central bank balance sheets, as it was to 14th century camel caravans. What does a 14th century Malian emperor teach us about today's interconnected financial world? The lessons are strikingly pertinent. First, interconnectedness. Mansa Musa's spending in Cairo demonstrates how a major economic action in one node of a network can cause cascading failure, much like the 2008 financial crisis originating in U.S. housing markets. Second, supply shock vulnerability. Modern economies are vulnerable to similar shocks, not in gold, but in critical commodities like oil, semiconductors, or grain, as seen in the 1970s oil crises or post-pandemic supply chains. Third, the limits of hard assets. The event proves that even safe assets like gold can crash in value if their supply dynamics change abruptly, a lesson for investors who view any asset as inherently inflation-proof. Fourth, unintended consequences. It is the ultimate case study in the law of unintended consequences, where well-intentioned actions, a pilgrimage, stimulus spending, can have catastrophic secondary effects if systemic impacts are not modeled. In an era of massive quantitative easing, sovereign wealth fund investments, and volatile cryptocurrency flows, Mansa Musa's story is a primordial blueprint. It reminds policymakers and investors that scale matters. Context is everything, and the movement of vast capital must be undertaken with humility and a deep respect for the fragile ecosystems of value and trust that constitute an economy. The final chapter of Mansa Musa's economic saga forces us to confront a fundamental question: what is the true measure of wealth? Initially, it was counted in pounds of gold, a physical quantity that proved destructively potent. His wealth was so vast it became a negative externality, damaging another nation's economic health. But by the end of his life, the measure had transformed. Lasting wealth was not in the depleted gold sacks, but in the erected mosques of Timbuktu, the filled libraries of Sankor, and the elevated status of Mali in the global imagination. He converted volatile monetary capital into enduring cultural and intellectual capital. This pilgrimage, therefore, narrates an arc from monetary wealth to destructive power to, finally, legacy building. The gold was the means, not the end. The inflation in Cairo was the catastrophic cost of this learning process. The ultimate takeaway is that wealth unchanneled is a risk. Wealth hoarded is sterile, but wealth strategically invested in the foundations of civilization, education, architecture, culture, becomes immortal. Mansa Musa's story, then, is not just about being the richest man who ever lived. It is a more profound parable about the responsibility of power, the transition from consumption to creation, and the hard lesson that real prosperity is built not on what you spend, but on what you build for others long after the spending spree is over and the markets have finally, painfully, stabilized. Mansa Musa's journey stands as one of history's most dramatic lessons in economics. That even the purest form of wealth can become an instrument of unintended ruin when its scale meets an unprepared system. From the gold fields of Mali to the markets of Cairo, we've traced the arc of a single decision that distorted an economy for over a decade, teaching us timeless principles about money supply, inflation, and systemic fragility. This wasn't malice. It was the collision of immense power with the delicate mechanisms of value. His story forces us to look beyond the legend of limitless gold to the hard truths of economic cause and effect. The real legacy, however, wasn't the chaos left in Cairo, but the universities built in Timbuktu, a reminder that the ultimate purpose of wealth is not display, but transformation. If this deep dive into the intersection of history and high-stakes finance gripped you, then your next chapter is waiting. We will soon unravel the story of the richest corporation in history, a single trading enterprise so powerful it commanded private armies, minted its own currency, and collapsed entire kingdoms for profit. This is a tale of capitalism stripped bare, where ledgers were more powerful than laws. To ensure you don't miss this explosive investigation into absolute corporate power, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next file in the Blood Money Archive is coming soon.